My name is Cordelia Mercer. I am 46 years old. And on the Friday I buried my husband of 18 years. A woman I had never met walked into the back of the chapel holding a manila folder against her chest, and told me in front of 200 mourners that she had been married to him for 11 years before me, and that the marriage had never legally ended. She did not say it loudly. She did not need to. She said it the way a doctor says the result of a biopsy, with the careful tonal restraint of a woman who has practiced the sentence in her car on the way over. Her name was Faye Tillman. She was 53. She wore a black wool coat that had been good 15 years ago, and a pair of low-heeled pumps that did not match the coat. The way you do not match your pumps to your coat when you are a woman who has spent the last week sleeping in 2-hour increments because of something nobody has yet told you out loud. Her hair was gray-streaked, pulled back in a clip. She had reddened eyes. She had brought, inside the manila folder, 3 sets of documents, 1 paper clipped, 2 stapled, and a single photograph of a young man in a college cap and gown who looked so much like my husband Marcus that for a long second I could not breathe. The young man in the photograph was 31 years old. He worked, Faye told me, as a structural engineer in Portland, Oregon. His name was Daniel Tillman. He was Marcus's son. Faye was the mother. Daniel had been born in the 8th month of their marriage. He had grown up calling Marcus on his birthday for the first 12 years of his life, and then never again. Because at age 12, Daniel had asked his father why he never visited, and Marcus had not had an answer that worked, and the answer had not improved with time. Marcus had also not, Faye told me, ever divorced her. There had been no decree. There had been no separation papers. There had been a man who packed 2 suitcases on a Saturday morning in 1998, told his wife he needed time, and never came home. He had used a different name for the second half of his life. The name he had married me under, Marcus Mercer, was the surname of his mother's second husband. His legal name, on a birth certificate filed in West Virginia in 1966, was Marcus Whitlock. I had been Marcus Mercer's wife for 18 years. There had never been, I was being told, by a stranger holding a folder, in front of 200 mourners, in a chapel filled with white lilies that I had selected 3 days ago at a florist on Wickham Avenue, a legal Marcus Mercer, at all. I want you to understand what I was wearing. I want you to understand the smallness of what I had been getting through in the 72 hours before the chapel. I want you to understand, because the thing about grief, the thing nobody tells you, is that the version of yourself who is grieving is a smaller, slower, more procedural version. She is mostly handling logistics. She is mostly making calls about caterers and answering the phone in a voice that does not yet realize it is a voice. She is not, in those early days, capable of receiving large news. She is barely capable of receiving small news. The body has been put on emergency triage, and the triage is allocated to the funeral. There is nothing left over. So when Faye Tillman stepped into the back of the chapel with her folder, I had been awake since 4:15 that morning. I had been on the phone with my husband's law partner about an obituary edit at 5. I had been at the funeral home at 6 to confirm the order of service. I had not eaten anything that day except a single piece of toast that my daughter Saoirse had put into my hand at 7:30, and that I had carried to the chapel uneaten. I was wearing a black wool dress that had been my mother's, and the pearls my husband had given me on our 10th anniversary, and a small gold cross my grandmother had given me at confirmation in 1988. I was 46 years old, and I had buried my mother 9 months earlier, and my father 2 years before that, and now I was burying my husband. And there had been a part of me, in the car on the way over, that had thought, I am running out of people to bury. That sentence had felt manageable. Faye Tillman was not manageable. She walked in at the very back of the chapel during the second hymn. She did not sit down. She stood against the rear wall, by the bulletin board where the church posted its prayer requests, and she waited, holding the folder against her chest with both hands, until the hymn ended and the pastor stepped down from the pulpit to invite people to come forward and speak. She waited because she had been raised, I would later learn, by a woman who did not interrupt religious services. Even now, even with what she was about to do. She waited. When the pastor invited people forward, Faye Tillman raised her hand. She did not come down the aisle. She raised her hand from the back. She raised it the way you raise your hand in a meeting, politely. With the slight self-consciousness of a woman who has not raised her hand in a public setting in many years. The pastor, who is a kind man named Reverend Holst, hesitated. He looked at me. I did not understand what was happening. I shook my head slightly. I did not know her. I had never seen her. I assumed she was a colleague of Marcus's I had not met. Reverend Holst nodded toward her. She lowered her hand. She did not speak from the back. She walked, slowly, down the center aisle. The wool coat hung wrong on her shoulders. The pumps clicked on the marble. 200 faces turned in sequence, the way faces turn at a wedding when the bride enters. Except this was not a wedding, and she was not a bride, and the only person at the front who needed to recognize her was me. And I did not. She stopped at the third pew from the front. She did not come to the casket. She did not come to the pulpit. She stopped at the third pew, and she turned, and she looked directly at me, and she said, in a voice that did not shake, "My name is Faye Tillman. I was Marcus Whitlock's first wife. I was never his ex-wife. I am sorry to do this here. I have a son who deserved to know his father was dying. And I did not know either. And I am here to find out what happened. And I am sorry. But I am here." The chapel went quiet. I sat very still in my pew. My daughter Cherche, on my left, did not move. My son Cillian, on my right, did not move. The folder was still pressed to Faye's chest. I did none of the things people do in movies. I did not scream. I did not faint. I did not weep. I sat in my pew, and I felt the bottom of the world become a different bottom. With different rules, and a different shape, and a different name on the deed. And I sat very, very still. And I waited for what came next. What came next was not at all what I expected. To understand what Faye Tillman walking into that chapel meant, you have to understand the marriage she had just entered, like a draft of cold air. You have to understand the 18 years I had built with a man I had loved completely, and the small architecture of trust that had held the whole structure upright, and the specific weight-bearing wall she had, with one quiet sentence in the back of a church, just removed. I met Marcus Mercer in the spring of 2006. I was 28. I had been working as a hospital chaplain for 4 years at the time, which is an unusual job for a woman of 28, and which had given me the strange double life of being constantly around dying people while remaining, in my own private hours, full of plans for the future. Hospital chaplaincy is mostly listening. You do not provide answers. You do not pray on demand, although you will pray if asked. Mostly you sit with people whose worlds are rearranging without permission, and you let the rearranging happen in the presence of another human being. Because the rearranging is worse alone. It was, in retrospect, exactly the right training for what was about to happen to me. I met Marcus in the hospital. He had brought his mother in for a cardiac event. She was 72. She survived, that day. She would survive another 3 years before another cardiac event would not be survived. Marcus had been sitting in the family waiting room on the cardiac floor when I'd come by with the chaplaincy cart that had cookies on it, and a stack of pamphlets nobody ever actually read. He was 41. He had a half-undone tie. He had a yellow legal pad on the chair beside him, and a big pen in his hand, and he was sketching, without looking at the page, the floor plan of a building. I asked him what he was drawing. He looked up. He said, "It's the lobby of my mother's apartment building. I'm trying to remember what it looks like, so I can describe it to her when she wakes up. She's been worrying about whether the new doorman is going to remember her name." He said it without irony. He said it with the flat, focused affection of a man who genuinely loved his mother and had been afraid for an hour. I sat down. I asked him to tell me about his mother. He told me. He talked about her for 40 minutes. I did not say much. I let him do what he needed to do. When the surgeon came out to tell him she was stable, he stood up and shook the surgeon's hand, and then turned to me and said, "I don't know your name." I told him. He said, "Cordelia." "Thank you for sitting." I said, "That's the job." He said, "It's a good job. You're good at it." Then he was gone, with the surgeon into the recovery wing. I went back to the chaplaincy cart. He called the hospital chaplaincy office the following Tuesday. He asked the receptionist for me by name. He invited me to dinner. He took me to a small Italian place on Atherton Street. He told me, between the appetizer and the entree, that he was 41 years old, that he had never been married, that he had no children, that he was a real estate attorney specializing in nonprofit acquisitions, that his father had died when he was 11, that his mother had remarried a man named Mercer who had been kind but cool, and that he had taken Mercer's last name in college as a gesture toward the stepfather who had paid for his tuition. He told me he was originally from West Virginia. He told me he had no family there anymore. He told me he was an only child. He told me, plainly, that he did not want to waste my time if I was looking for something more transient. He was looking for a wife. He had been looking for a long time. He thought he had perhaps been looking, without knowing it, for a chaplain. I will tell you, with the benefit of hindsight, that exactly one sentence in the above paragraph was true. The Bic pen. He had used a Bic pen. The rest was a story he had been refining since 1998. He had not been 41. He had been 40. He had not been never married. He had been married twice, including a brief annulment in his early 20s that I would learn about months later from Faye. Both of which Faye and her son had known about, and which Marcus had filed in his interior life under before my life started. He had children. He had one child. Daniel was 23 years old that night in the Italian restaurant. He was, in 1998, 8 years old, sitting in his mother's apartment in Chevy Chase, waiting for his father to come home from a work trip that was never going to end. Marcus's father had not died when Marcus was 11. Marcus's father had died when Marcus was 41, 2 years after he and I were married, of cirrhosis, in a state-funded facility in Charleston, West Virginia, with no one in attendance. Marcus had not been an only child. Marcus had a sister named Lavinia, who was at that moment, in 2006, alive and well in Roanoke, Virginia, working as a pediatric dental hygienist, and who would not learn that her brother had died until 11 days after the funeral, when a cousin of Faye's would call her. Marcus had not been from a family with no remaining family. Marcus had been from a family he had decided, at 23, to no longer belong to. I did not know any of this on the night of the Italian restaurant. I knew only that a man with kind eyes and a half-undone tie and a Bic pen had taken me to dinner and told me, plainly, what he was looking for, and the looking matched mine, and I had spent 4 years sitting with dying strangers in waiting rooms, and I realized, ready to sit with one living person on purpose. I married Marcus Mercer 11 months later. I wore my mother's dress. We had Serge a year after that. Cillian came 3 years later. I built a life with him. 18 years. A real life. Houses. In 2 cities. A summer cabin we restored together over 6 years. 2 children. A vegetable garden. Friends. Real ones. A marriage that I would have, on Thursday of that week, sworn under oath was one of the genuinely good ones. On Friday, Faye Tillman walked into the chapel, and the genuinely good marriage I had built turned out to have been built on top of a marriage that had been pretending, the whole time, not to exist. There is a part of me that wants to skip the rest of the funeral. But the rest of the funeral is the part of this story that taught me who I was going to be, in the second half of my life. Faye stood in the 3rd pew. She did not move. She did not say anything more. The folder stayed against her chest. Reverend Holst, who is 68 years old and has been a pastor since the 1970s and has seen more strange weather than any of us, looked at me. He gave me, with his eyes, the gentlest version of a question. He was asking, "Do you want me to remove her?" He was asking, "Do you want me to keep going?" He was asking, "Do you want to call a recess?" He was asking, in the way that a good pastor asks, what I needed. I did not know what I needed. I did not have a category for what was happening. I had a category for grief. I had a category for the funeral mechanics, the eulogies, the obituaries, the hymns, the receiving line. I did not have a category for a woman walking into a funeral and announcing that the deceased had been someone else's husband first. I did the thing I had been trained to do in chaplaincy. When a situation has no category, you create the smallest possible procedural category that allows you to keep moving. I had learned this from a woman named Sister Bernice, who had trained me at the hospital, and who had taught me that the smallest possible procedural category in any pastoral emergency is: ask one clarifying question and listen to the answer. I stood up. I will not pretend my legs were steady. But I stood up, and I turned in the pew so that I was facing Faye, and I said, in the voice I used in waiting rooms with strangers, the voice that has nothing in it but a willingness to listen, "Faye, I am sorry. I do not know you. I would like to. I would like to do this honorably. May I ask you to wait in the lobby of the chapel with Reverend Holst until the service is finished? I do not want to ask you to leave. You are welcome here. But I would like to bury my husband first, and then I would like to sit with you. May we do it that way?" The chapel did not breathe. Faye looked at me. The folder did not move. She nodded. She nodded slowly, and with what I now understand was a kind of complicated relief. She had walked in not knowing what would happen. She had walked in expecting to be ejected, or screamed at, or denounced. She had been prepared, she would later tell me, for any of those outcomes. She had not been prepared for the chaplain. Reverend Holst rose from his chair beside the pulpit. He walked down the aisle with the same unhurried pace he uses in every service. He reached Faye. He offered her his arm, very lightly. He said, in a voice that carried just enough to be heard by the front pews and not the back, "Mrs. Tellman, will you sit with me in the parish office? There is tea. We will leave the chapel to its work, and we will sit, and the service will continue, and when the service is done, we will come back, all of us, together." She let him take her arm. She walked, with him, out of the chapel through the side door. The folder she carried. The folder was a presence in the air of that chapel for the next 40 minutes. Every single person in the room had seen it. Nobody knew what was in it. Some of them, I now know, had a suspicion. Some of them would later tell me, in the receiving line, and afterward, that they had wondered. They had wondered why I had never met Marcus's sister. They had wondered why he never went to West Virginia. They had wondered about the old low rumble of mistrust that some men carry around them, the way some men do, that you cannot quite locate but that other men notice. They had wondered. They had not said. Nobody says, at a wedding, "I have a faint suspicion about your husband." So they had not. They had let me marry him, and they had been kind to him at Christmas parties for 18 years, and now, in the chapel, they were watching the suspicion arrive in person. I sat back down. Circe held my hand. Shillian, who is 15, had not moved his hand from the pew. His knuckles were white. I reached across my lap and covered his hand with my other hand. He looked at me. He did not say anything. He nodded. Reverend Holst returned. He went back up to the pulpit. He cleared his throat. He looked at me. I looked at him. I gave him the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. He resumed the service. He resumed it with such grace that I will, until the day I die, owe Reverend Holst a debt I cannot repay. He did not address what had happened. He did not pretend it had not happened. He simply moved forward with the order of service, the way you keep walking forward when the ground has tilted, because the alternative is to stop forever, and Marcus, whoever he had been, still needed to be buried. I gave my eulogy. I had written it the night before. I read it as I had written it. I did not change a word. I sat down. The service finished. The casket was carried out. Saoirse and Chilean walked behind it with me. I did not look at the back of the chapel. I knew Faye was still there. I knew the folder was still there. I knew the rest of my life was waiting. In the parish office, on the other side of a tea kettle. The parish office is at the back of the church. It is a small room, with 2 armchairs and a small couch, and a window that looks out onto the cemetery, which I have always thought was either a brave architectural choice or a thoughtless one. There is a kettle on a side table. There is an electric one and a stovetop one. Because Reverend Holst likes the stovetop one but his assistant Marigold uses the electric one and they have been negotiating, for as long as I have known either of them. Which one is correct? The kettle that was on when I walked in was the stovetop one. Reverend Holst had made the tea himself. He had brought a 3rd teacup, which he had not poured. He had brought it, I think, only as a prop, so that if any of us needed an excuse to hold something, the cup would be available. Faye sat in one of the armchairs. The folder was on the small coffee table in front of her. She was holding a cup of tea with both hands. The cup was not steady. Her hands had been steady in the chapel, when she had needed them to be. The cost of that steadiness was now arriving. I recognized it. I had seen this in waiting rooms. The body always collects its bill, eventually. I sat in the other armchair. Reverend Holst stayed in the room. He sat on the small couch. He did not say anything. He was there as witness, not as participant. Faye looked at me for a long moment. "I am so sorry," she said. I nodded. "I do not want anything," she said. "I want you to know that, first. I am not here for the estate. I am not here for any money. I am not here to ruin you. I am here because my son does not know his father is dead. I read the obituary in the regional paper 3 days ago. I was visiting my cousin in Charlottesville. I picked up a newspaper. I do not normally read newspapers. The obituary used the name Mercer, not Whitlock, but the photograph was him. The photograph was Marcus. I knew that face. I had been married to it for 11 years. I nodded. "I drove home," she said. "I went through my old papers. I had not looked at them in years. I had filed for divorce in the late 90s when he disappeared. The divorce was never finalized because he could not be served. I let it go. I told my son, when he was old enough to ask, that his father had gone away and that we did not know where, and that we would have a life without him. And we did. We had a life. I built a life. I want you to know I am okay. I am a kindergarten teacher. I have been one for 30 years. I have a small house in Arlington. I have a sister in Reston. I am okay. My son is okay. We have been okay for a long time." She set the teacup down. She did not pick it back up. "But I needed," she said. "I needed to know. I needed my son to know. I am not here to take anything from you. I am here because if I had not come, I would have spent the rest of my life knowing that my son's father died, and his son did not get to know about it in time to attend the funeral, or to have a chance to feel whatever he needed to feel. And I could not let that be how it ended. I am sorry. I am so, so sorry. I believe you," I said. I did not need to say more. She understood. I am not the woman I was in that church. I am not the woman who held onto a marriage certificate as if it were a shield against the world. I am someone who knows now that truth is not found in government-issued documents. It is found in the moments we survive, the people we choose to keep in our orbit, and the willingness to look at the folder, whatever form it takes in your own life, and open it. The months that followed the funeral were a masterclass in excavation. I spent weeks in lawyers' offices, surrounded by the smell of stale coffee and old paper, Listening to men in expensive suits explain that my 18-year marriage was, legally, a voidable contract. Voidable. As if our children were voidable. As if the 6 years spent restoring that summer cabin, the sweat, the arguments over paint colors, the laughter when the roof leaked, were voidable. I refused to let the terminology dictate the truth. We had lived. That was non-negotiable. Faye and I developed a rapport that was less about friendship and more about a shared, grim recognition. We were two veterans of the same psychological war. We sat in her living room in Arlington, surrounded by the ghosts of a life he had walked out on, and we dissected him. Not with hate. There's no room for hate when the man is gone, but with the clinical detachment of coroners. We looked for the why. She told me about the boy who was afraid of the dark, the man who couldn't stand the sound of rain because it reminded him of his father leaving. I told her about the man who bought me flowers every Tuesday, because he knew I had a rough shift on Mondays. We were trying to reconcile the two versions, the monster of neglect and the man of small, kind gestures. We never quite finished the puzzle. Meeting Daniel was like looking into a mirror that reflected a different timeline. He had all of Marcus's physical traits, but his eyes were clear, untroubled by the secret he had spent his life trying to solve. He didn't want the estate. He wanted the narrative. He wanted to know if his father had loved him. I couldn't give him an answer. Not really. I could only show him the man I knew. I gave him the desk, the very desk Marcus had sat at to write me love letters, and I watched him touch the wood, feeling the weight of the man who had been both his father and a complete stranger. It was a bridge-building exercise for all of us. Serge has met him. They get along. Cillian has not yet met him in person, but they email occasionally. Cillian writes to him in a way Cillian does not write to anyone else. I have not read the emails. They are not mine. Faye and I are also friends now, in a strange, quiet way. We do not see each other often. But she sent a Christmas card last year. I sent one back. She came to Serge's high school graduation, sitting at the back with my permission, not interfering, not announcing herself, simply present, because she had asked. And I had said yes. Serge hugged her after the ceremony. Faye cried. I cried. The man who should have been there, who should have been crying with us, was not there, and he was the reason all of this had happened. And yet, somehow, his absence had created the strange community in which his first wife and his second wife and his daughter could stand on a high school lawn in the late spring sun and embrace each other and miss him together. I do not know what to call what Marcus did. I have spent 18 months trying to find a word. The word betrayal is too small. The word deception is too clinical. The word abandonment applies to what he did to Faye and Daniel but does not capture what he did to me, because what he did to me was different. He did not abandon me. He stayed. He stayed for 18 years. But he stayed inside a fiction. He stayed inside a story he had written about himself before he met me, and he never let me see the rest of the story, and the rest of the story turned out to include people. I think the word, now, 18 months later, is something more like absence. Marcus was a man who had absented himself from his own life, twice, and who had built two new lives on top of the absences, and who had never quite returned, fully, to himself. The man I had loved was a man who had been, in some important sense, not all the way there. I had loved him, and he had loved me, and he had loved Saoirse and Cillian, and all of that was real. But he had also been, the whole time, not all the way present in his own being, because the part of him that lived in West Virginia, the part that lived in Chevy Chase, the part that had been a son and a brother and a husband and a father in his first life, that part he had buried under a different name and stopped tending. And what you do not tend, in yourself, you eventually have to bury again. He had buried that part twice. He had spent 2 lives burying himself. I am not the woman I was in that church. I am someone who knows now that truth is not found in government-issued documents. It is found in the moments we survive, the people we choose to keep in our orbit, and the willingness to look at the folder, whatever form it takes in your own life, and open it. The weeks after the funeral, I went back to chaplaincy work. I had stopped, in 2020, when Cillian was small and Marcus had been making enough money, that we had decided I could focus on the children. The hospital was glad to have me back. They put me on the cardiac floor, which is where I had met Marcus, which felt either cruel or appropriate, depending on the day. I sit with strangers now, in the same waiting rooms where I sat with him. I bring the cart with the cookies and the pamphlets. I sit down. I ask people to tell me about the person upstairs. I let them talk. I do not say much. I have, in the months since I came back, sat with 12 men who reminded me of Marcus in some specific way. The half-undone tie, the legal pad, the Bic pen. And I have noticed, without flinching, that the resemblances do not undo me. They do not undo me, because I have learned, in the months since the funeral, that Marcus was one specific man, and the men I am sitting with are other specific men. And the work of chaplaincy is not the work of projecting your own story onto theirs. The work is to listen to the story they bring you. I had forgotten how to do that. In the 18 years I was a wife, I had become, slowly, a person who heard other people's stories through the filter of my own. The funeral burned the filter off. I am back to the original instrument. The cabin we restored together I have sold. I sold it 6 months after the funeral. I did not want to keep it. The cabin had been the project of a marriage that had not legally existed. I could not, every spring, drive up to a building that had been, in some literal sense, evidence of a fiction. I sold it to a young couple who restore old buildings for a living, and who promised to take care of the place. I drove past it once, in October, to see what they had done. They had repainted the porch. The porch was a deep green now, instead of the gray Marcus and I had chosen. The deep green was better. I drove home. I did not cry until I was almost back to the house. The house in town I have kept. The house in town is where my children grew up. The house in town has Marcus in it, his books, his coats, his desk, but it also has me in it, and Saoirse and Cillian, and the 18 years of life we built in it, the parts of which were real. I will not sell the house. The house is still my house. The lies do not get to take the house from me. They took enough. I have decided that the man I lost, whoever he was, whoever he had been before he was the man I lost, does not get to define the woman I become after losing him. He gets the 18 years he had with me. Those 18 years were real, in the parts that were real, and they were a fiction, in the parts that were a fiction, and the woman I was during those years is owed the right to be both of those things at once, and not have to resolve them into a single tidy story. I am not a tidy story. He was not a tidy story. We were two people, married for 18 years, one of whom was hiding a previous life. That is what we were. I have decided to let it be that. I have decided not to keep trying to make it smaller or larger than it was. I have decided to put it down. I want to say to you, if you have made it this far, the worst news of your life is not always the news that ends you. Sometimes the worst news of your life is the news that opens you. Sometimes the woman who walks into the back of the chapel with a folder against her chest is not the woman who is destroying your life. Sometimes she is the woman who is giving you back a part of your life you did not know had been taken from you. Sometimes she is the door, and the door, if you can stand to walk through it, opens into a room you would not otherwise have been brave enough to enter. I was a chaplain before I was a wife. I have been a chaplain again, now, since I stopped being one. The 18 years of being a wife were a real, important, beautiful chapter of my life. I do not regret a single day of them, even the ones built on Marcus's lies, because the days were real even if the foundation was not. And you cannot ask a marriage to be more than the days you actually lived inside it. The days were the days. The children were the children. The mornings on the porch with coffee were the mornings on the porch with coffee. Those things happened. Faye Tillman walking into the chapel did not undo those things. Faye Tillman walking into the chapel only added a new column to the ledger. The first column was still there. The first column will always be there. I have stopped trying to subtract it. I have stopped doing is performing the marriage I had as a marriage that was uncomplicated. It was not uncomplicated. It was deeply, profoundly, foundationally complicated. And the complication did not arrive at the funeral. The complication had been there the whole time. I had simply not been able to see it. Because Marcus had been very, very good at building the version of himself that he wanted me to see. I want, now, to be the kind of woman who can see complications when they are happening, and not 18 years later, in a chapel, when somebody else has had to come hand them to me in a folder. I am working on it. I am not yet there. I will probably not be there for the rest of my life. But I am working on it. I want to thank Faye Tellman, publicly, for the courage of walking into that chapel. I know she will never watch this video. She does not use the internet very much. But I want it on the record. She did the bravest thing I have ever seen a stranger do. She did it without an audience for the bravery. She did it with her son in mind. She did it for him. She had no idea what was on the other side of the door. She walked through anyway. I want to thank Reverend Holst for the tea, and for the chair, and for stepping out of the office at the right moment. Pastors who do their jobs well are nearly invisible. Reverend Holst was nearly invisible that day. He was also the spine of the day. Both of those things were true at once. I want to thank my children, Saoirse and Chilean, for being people whose hearts were already large enough, before any of this happened, to be larger again when it had to be. I did not give that to them by accident. I gave it to them by trying, every day for the years they were small, to be a woman who taught them that the world was complicated, and that they could meet it. Marcus gave that to them too, in the parts of him that were available to give. We did some things right, even inside the fiction. I am keeping the things we did right. They were ours. I want to thank Daniel, my husband's other son, who has become, in 18 months, a person I look forward to talking with on the phone. Daniel did not have to forgive his father. Daniel did not formally forgive his father. But Daniel has agreed to be in the room with the fact of his father, and to look at the desk by the window in his apartment, and to write letters to his half-brother Killian, and to fly out for Sari's graduation. Daniel has agreed to be a person who allows a complicated story to remain complicated, and still loves the parts of it that can be loved. That is more than most people can do. He is a man his father would have been proud of, if his father had ever managed to be present long enough to meet him. I want to thank, finally, the woman watching this, who is going through something. I do not know what you are going through. I do not know whether you have been lied to, or buried someone, or both. I do not know whether the news you are sitting with is the news that ends you, or the news that opens you. But I want to tell you, from the other side of the worst 18 months of my life, you can survive it. You can survive it, and the surviving is not a small thing. The surviving is the whole thing. You do not have to know, on the day of the news, who you will be on the other side. You only have to be the woman who, when the stranger raises her hand at the back of the chapel, lets her speak. The rest of it follows. The rest of it is the rest of your life. You will build the rest of your life out of what you find in the folder. You will not be the woman you were before the folder. You will be a larger woman. A more honest woman. A woman who has stopped pretending that the simple version of her life is the true one. Your life was never simple. Your life was always larger than the story you were telling yourself about it. The folder only confirmed what you, in some quiet interior place, had already half known. That is my story. A chapel. A folder. A second wife who turned out to also have been a first. 2 women in a small parish office with a stovetop kettle. A son in Portland with his father's hands. A boy in the corner by the bookshelves who hugged a stranger. A life I am still building. If this reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment with the words "the folder" if you have ever been handed a truth larger than the room you were standing in. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I'll see you in the next one. The kettle is on. The light is going. The dog is asleep at my feet. I am here. That is enough.